Alright, so I'm going to model and texture this house in Blender, and while I'm doing that, I wanted to tell you about this guy. So that guy, his name is Maurice Binder, and if you don't recognize him by name, you might know what he's most famous for, which is creating the James Bond gun barrel title sequence. For the sake of keeping this video short, I'm not going to go into his childhood or early life, but if you enjoy learning about him, I encourage you to look into him more. I found it pretty interesting. So his big break came in 1960 when he did this, which is the title sequence for the movie The Grass is Greener. To someone watching it now, it doesn't really come across as particularly special, but at the time, opening credit sequences were really long and boring and didn't have much going on. So the premiere for The Grass is Greener took place in London, and in attendance were Albert Broccoli and Harry Saltzman, and they were the two James Bond producers, and they liked the intro so much that they decided to hire Maurice. Alright, so it's, I think, common knowledge that your first impressions of something have a disproportionate impact on what you think of that thing. And I think that's especially true for movies, which means that title sequences and intros and all that are really, really important. Dr. No was the first James Bond movie that Maurice did the intro for. When it came out, people were blown away by it. At a time when most movies started like this, having a movie start like this had a huge impact on people. I might even make the argument that for a lot of people, Maurice's title sequence was more memorable than the movie itself. Maurice ended up doing 14 different title sequences for James Bond movies. They definitely evolved over time, but they also kept a lot of the same common themes. He used bold, saturated primary colors, sans serif fonts, geometric shapes, and I think most important, he was a big fan of using silhouette. Maurice described his work for the James Bond films as a visual distillation of sex and violence. So if you spend too much time on Instagram and you watch one of these James Bond intros for the first time, you might think, oh, this looks like the mid-2000s iPod ad campaign. And I would agree that that ad campaign took a ton of inspiration from the James Bond intros, but the big distinction for me is that instead of the silhouette being of like a hipster breakdancing, it was of a beautiful naked model. I think another key to what makes his intros so good is that all the music that he was using was written explicitly for the movie and for the title sequence. So he could work with the producer, composer, musician, and get the song to be exactly how he wanted it to be tone-wise, and then he could tailor his intro to that song. I really love how watching his intros makes me feel. And I've found it kind of hard to put into words, but I'm going to try. So when I watch his stuff, it gives me that kind of idealized feeling of the golden age of Western culture. Like, it gives me the feeling of how I thought the world was when I was a little kid. And I also really love his work because I think he does a great job at incorporating both the masculine and feminine. Like, it manages to convey a feeling of danger and adventure and mystery, but it also has elements of sex appeal and glamour and elegance. Anyway, that's enough out of me, but shout out to Maurice Binder, rest in peace, and leave a humongous love if you enjoyed this video. And also, here is the finished house. Bye.